Hello and welcome to Murder Analysed. I'm Christina Moore. Now the case we're going to look at today is an English case, 1993. It is the Beverley Allitt case, aka the Angel of Death, the nurse that killed and attempted to kill and also had done grievous bodily harm on children in a hospital. Okay, so that's the case for today. So I think with this case is where I'm going to start with Beverley's case, is at her childhood, because we need to look again at most of these cases. It starts with signs from childhood. So Beverley had a mother and father. The mother was a cleaner. The father worked in a liquor store, as an assistant. They were working class people. She was one of 4 children. She had 2 sisters, 1 brother. But from an early age, a very early age, she was showing signs of needing more attention, I would say, at these early stages in her life. She would put bandages on her arms and her hands. She would put them in casts, but she wouldn't let anyone look at them. I'm hurt, I'm injured, but you can't look. That was her sort of attitude towards that from a very young age, really. So she was exhibiting, I suppose, this tension-seeking behaviour then, from a very young age. So the family would, of course, then have to take her to the hospitals, where she spent a lot of time in this Grantham Hospital herself. She would have to go to different doctors all the time because she was constantly complaining of some ailments, and mainly of them were ones that you couldn't really detect whether she had it or not, but she was constantly seeking attention through saying she was unwell, she was ill. At one point when she was a child, she actually had her appendix removed, and the appendix was actually quite a normal appendix. And then she also played with done something to the scar to elongate the recovery time from that. Again, this seeking attention behaviour from her at a very young age. So as she got a little bit older, into her teens, she became a little bit overweight. Well, actually, she was overweight, and some teens do. They go through different hormone changes, and so the weight piles on a little bit, but they soon lose it. She didn't. She was also then exhibiting quite aggressive behaviour to people, and also she was self-harming herself. To get this attention, it was all about that for her. So anyway, after a few years of that, when she became a little bit older, where then she could actually, or she did, go and train as a nurse. Ironic, I know, right? So she went on and trained as a nurse. So it's a worrying situation when someone literally comes from that sort of background and all through their childhood has been known as seeking attention through to herself, through harm that she's either caused herself or that she's made up about. So then that, I suppose, should bring us on to Munchausen syndrome. So Munchausen syndrome is where somebody would harm themselves or pretend to be ill. All the signs for Munchausen syndrome was there as a child with her. Okay, you could see if that's what you was looking for, which I don't know why no one did at that young age, but that's what you would have been looking for. So that Munchausen syndrome is about you, your attention. You're seeking medical attention. This is why the doctors and the hospitals and the removal of the appendix and the bandages, the bad arms, the high temperatures, the illnesses that no one really could prove that was actually there, but that was all clear signs of that. So as she then went to train, that would be, as a nurse, that would be then a worrying, it would have been worrying. And if she had been diagnosed with that, because really that is a psychological issue, and you know, and you would have needed therapy or something for that. She didn't have any. Okay, she didn't have any therapy at all. So you've now got this child who's grown up with this, also then showing aggressive signs towards others, and now going on to train as a nurse. Now, when she was training as a nurse, it's now known that one, that she was continually off sick anyway, she was hardly there, but two, that she was showing some very strange behaviours. She was, where she was staying, where she was being trained, was in a nursing home, and it was said or alleged that she had smeared feces, human feces, on the fridge. She had set fire to the curtains. She'd sort of exhibiting different behaviours. Plus, she was also failing at this nursing. It took her a long time because she kept failing her in nursing exams. So the intelligence wasn't there, really. You know, quite clearly, it wasn't there. She struggled. One, because she never went, because she was always too engrossed in her own self. I'm sick, look at me, I need sympathy, help me. But also, you know, she finally passed. And unfortunately she did, because if she had failed all that, she would never have got in the position to have done what she did. So, okay, so now she goes on to training as this nurse. She's finally done it. And then she can't find a job. Because one, I think of her background, because the jobs that she's gone for is in the same hospital as that she had been there previously as a child, as a teenager, and as an adult. She actually also had to be swapping doctors, so she was doctor hopping, because these doctors knew that she was seeking attention. There was actually nothing wrong with her. So anyway, she's applied for this job at Grantham Hospital, and to give them credit, right, they had they was very short-staffed, underfunded, as most NHS hospitals are. You've got this local girl that is trained, so she is qualified, she is passed, you know, she comes out as a staff nurse, so she has some responsibility as a nurse once she's qualified. They needed someone, and they hired her. I don't think it would have been their first choice, but they did. So she started work there, and let me explain how it works on this children's ward that she was employed on, which is a worry. So she was then employed on this children's ward, and they would have 2 qualified nurses on in the day and 1 qualified nurse on at night, and then you'd have care assistants and other people helping out as well, but they would have been the trained staff. Then the doctors would have done their rounds as they normally do, you know, or you'd have other teams if you needed them to be called in for emergencies. So that's sort of how this hospital worked. And that is how all hospitals work, really, when it comes to staffing of qualified staff. So she's now started this job. So she started, I think in April, no, she started before that. She started in February 1991 at this hospital, and within a few weeks things were going wrong. But I think by the first death, because she only actually killed 4 children, she tried to kill a lot more, but she only killed 4 children. So by the first death, and that was the 22nd of February 1991, she'd only been on this ward a few weeks. Okay, so her first victim was Liam Taylor. He was 7 weeks old. All right, so he was a tiny baby, 7 weeks old, and he was brought in. He was admitted onto that ward for a slight chest infection. Nothing serious. None of these kids had anything really seriously diagnosed with them, right? There was basic, most of them childhood illnesses. So a young child, 7 weeks old, is come onto this ward with a chest infection. And of course, Beverley is the first one there, and she's even reassuring the parents and don't worry, you know, they're in the best hands, we're going to look after him, you go home and you rest. Now, this child didn't last very many days. It went into actually cardiac arrest, and he died. All right. So then, again, another child was brought in. This is Timothy Hardwick. I think he was either between 7 and 11. I think he might have been 11. But he had cerebral palsy, and he also suffered from epilepsy. And so his, you know, I suppose it was expected that he would be a little bit more in distress than the others. Okay, but again, this boy, you know, he died on the 5th of March 1991, so it was only a couple of weeks before, after the first one she had murdered. So, again, cardiac arrest, and he was taken and then taken away and tried to be revived and everything else, but again, he died. Okay. Then you had Becky Phillips, who was 2 months old, and she died on the 1st of April. Now, she had like gastroenteritis. It's you know, a stomach bug that and stuff that kids have. It's another general everyday thing that a child would suffer with, and yes, you have to take them in to the hospital because they need to have fluids put in them and stuff to help them and stop the gastroenteritis getting any worse. But she died. Now another one died, and again. But I mean, the thing is with Becky, she was very young, and she sort of recovered enough to go home, but then died at home actually, and they put it down to a cot death with Becky. So it's so terrible for these families. Even speaking about it really upsets me, because this is a very upsetting case. So they put it down to a cot death, and it wasn't until later on, as you find out, you know, when they've looked back at what's happened to this child. But again, another child has died, and then we have the last child to die, not to be attempted to be murdered and not to have grievous bodily harm done to them, but the death is Claire Pegg. Now, she was 15 months old, and she was admitted for asthma attack at 15 months old. Again, yes, asthma attacks can kill, without a doubt. But this wasn't a severe asthma attack. This was a mild form of asthma attack, and the parents had took her in there, and on April the 22nd, 1991, she died, again from a cardiac arrest. She had to be resuscitated. It didn't work, this and the other. So that was the 4 main deaths. And for the rest of the names of the children, and they are all children, the ones that had attempted murder, and also the ones the 6 that she then also attempted like grievous bodily harm on. So that would all be put in the notes, and that, so their names would be in there, because I don't think I could do a video that long on this to explain every aspect of this case in detail. It's a massive case because of the wounding she did, because of the attempts she did, and then of course the murders. It would be too long, so I'm going to put them into the notes, so I hope you think that's okay. And also other places where you can look up information if you'd like it. So so that's the murder. So what was going on at the time at this hospital was, it was the case of Claire, I think, no, of Becky, that they found an injection point in the pit of her arm, so in the armpit under here, and also they found air bubbles, right? But again, at that point, this was not took up. This was then put down to, oh, it's an injection by mistake. Someone's made a mistake in the armpit under the arm of a very young child. Anyway, so it was noted that was what was there, but it wasn't really looked into. Okay, it was only when Claire the 15-month-old that died at home with a cot death, was then, it was a worrying fact then, I think, for the physicians at this hospital, the consultants and the doctors at this hospital, because they then realised something's going on. This child shouldn't have died from that. So even though they had autopsies and stuff, and I know with Timothy, that the one with the epilepsy bit and the cerebral palsy, his autopsy only showed, well, it didn't show anything really. So it really was put then down to an epileptic attack and the seizure that killed him. So I think with this case, and this is why it took so long to get to trial, is because the evidence, you know, you've got children being murdered in a hospital, but then when we think of what a hospital has to be like, if someone is ill and they die, they're moved then down to the autopsy room. So they're moved, all right? That room is then thoroughly cleaned. So then the evidence in that room itself has gone. So all you can then rely on is evidence from the autopsies itself. And if they're not finding, or they're not looking for criminality, they're just thinking it's a death either, or epilepsy or whatever. They're not really looking for what caused that death. And they're not looking for the signs that were around at the time. And what was happening on this ward at the time was that you had the medicine cabinet, which is a controlled drug medicine cabinet, on each ward, and you'd have to have 2 people to sign for a medication like insulin or morphine. You'd always had to have 2, signature dated. You couldn't just go to this cabinet and get it yourself. But their key went missing, and that wasn't really reported. You know, they got a new key, but it's a really serious thing to, on any hospital or any nursing home or ward or wherever you want to call it, that you hold, you know, dangerous drugs that could be used in these sort of crimes, that when the key goes missing or it's mislaid or whatever, that report isn't noted and isn't followed through. Plus also, there is an authorisation book that would have been kept on the ward. The sister would have had a copy and her own way of knowing who was where, who was looking after who. And so they had a clear record from that allocations book of who looked after these children at that time and what was done. Okay? So a lot of these children, because they didn't die on the first cardiac attack, they was put onto monitors that would monitor any emergency. So the minute their breathing stopped, their heart dropped, rate dropped, the alarms would go off and the team would come running. These children, that was removed. So no one else on that ward, no specialist teams that could have saved these children, knew, because she had removed that monitors for them alarms to save these children. Okay, so there's a lot in this case, but it's worth noting them sort of things before we go on. Okay, so anyway, so at the same time as working there, she was also with a boyfriend, and he had said that her personality was that she would say she was pregnant, but she wasn't really. Okay, she told people she was raped by him, you know, these sort of things, this attention thing, or she had been raped, she was deceitful, she was a liar. And that's what he's saying. She had this manipulative personality, quite aggressive, quite violent towards him. So that's what the ex-boyfriend said about her at the time of when he was with her, was when she was doing these crimes. Okay, so he had left her anyway before these crimes come out. So she was, as I said, a bit overweight and everything, and weight comes into this as we get a bit further down into the trial. But anyway, there was this police officer. So anyway, let's go back to the case. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself here. So she's now has been with every one of these children at the time. She's made friends with the families. One of the families actually asked her to be their godmother, the godmother of a child, because they felt so much trust in her. So, but when we think about nurses, let's think about nurses. Nurses train for a long time. They usually have great empathy. All they usually do is want to preserve life. They certainly don't want to stop it. So I can understand how this Beverley came across to these families as this great caring nurse. You know, we are going to look after your children. Your child is safe here with me. You go home, you rest, leave it up to the experts. She was an attention seeker. Look at me. So what's happened now is she's moved from Munchausen syndrome, which she had, which is about you hurting yourself or you seeking attention from the medical profession, to now Munchausen syndrome by proxy. So now she is now hurting others. She's now injuring others, causing harm, causing death for the attention. Because look at me, I've nursed them, I've looked after them. You're asking me to be their godmother. She's killing these kids, or attempting to kill them, or squeezing them so tight that she's broke their ribs. You know, this is what this woman was like on this ward for a matter of literally 4 months. Can you imagine what this woman would have done if you didn't have 2 doctors and a police officer that was so intent on stopping this woman from doing anything more? And we'll go on to that case trial bit in a minute, and actually the investigation of that case, because that alone took some doing. So this is the sort of woman we're dealing with. This woman is a serial killer, and she would have gone on to kill hundreds if she had had the chance. There was no stopping this girl, because she had moved now to that Munchausen syndrome by proxy. She was fully intending on hurting, and as you look through this case in more detail, again, there isn't enough time on this video to go into detail, where she would just inject them, I suppose, with insulin, and sometimes high levels of 900 times the insulin level that a normal person would have, which is a terrible death. Plus then you have the air bubbles, plus then we know now that she has broke their ribs, she's hurt them as well. You know, these kids didn't have a chance. And then to be resussed is also damaging. You know, they can break your ribs just on resus, especially as a child. You know, it's not an easy thing. This is a traumatic experience for these children, even the ones that survived. And we'll talk a little bit actually now about the ones that survived, because some survived with such severe brain damage that they were never going to have a normal life after this girl. You can't put that much insulin in your body and survive and come back normally. It's unheard of. So this case is distressing. I think it's massive in the way of its content. I don't know how she got to being a nurse, but we'll discuss that after. But anyway, so let's go on to the investigation. So they now know it's her, but now, under the law, right, because we're innocent until presumed guilty, they now have to prove it. And as I said before, you have a hospital that is cleaned. There should have been notes, there should have been some things done, but some things were found at that, you know, by not having the drugs cabinet key investigated, by not having the allocations book that was missing, that should have been investigated. There was a lot of things went wrong here, but then we're talking about short-staffed nurses trying to run a ward, trying to run a packed ward of children, and all of a sudden you've got amount of deaths that you don't normally have, and you've got doctors now calling in the police to say, we think something is amiss here and we need to sort this out, okay? Because whether they was natural causes or not, you have to still have an inquiry into why that many deaths or near deaths in a hospital in such a short period of time has happened. All right, so the doctors, good for them as well, pushed They rung the police, and this police officer, this investigator, was excellent, okay? But again, there's only a certain amount you can do in an investigation if you haven't got the evidence. So this case, I think it took them a while to get her suspended. They needed her suspended quite quickly, because if they hadn't, again, as I said, more kids were going to die. So they've suspended her, so that's got her out of that hospital, okay? Then it's about the investigation part for them, proving that she did this without without reasonable doubt. This is her. She's done this crime. So they done a search on her home, and they found a syringe in her home. They found a pillowcase, a hospital pillowcase, probably where she had kept the stuff. But they also found the allocations book, the book that tells other staff members, would have told the investigator who was with these children at a certain time, who was allocated these children, who spent the most time with these children. That book was there. But also the sister's book, that was very similar to that one. The pages of that information had already been ripped out. So she'd covered her crimes quite well, knowing it was going to be hard to prove this to her, about her. So with all this going on, a lot of people said to this investigator, and a lot of even his own colleagues had said, there's not enough evidence. We don't know if you're going to be able to get her on this. But I think this investigator was so worried, because if they hadn't have got her, if they hadn't had the proof that they had to search for desperately under autopsies and analysis and everything else on this, to get some evidence and to prove it wasn't just a natural cause death or a cause of death by, cardiac arrest or epilepsy. And it all then comes down, I think, to the analysation of the bloods and the bodies. And they found then that there was masses, I think, it was 1.47 milligrams to what a normal person should have is like 14 or 15. So it's masses of insulin being put into these children. And so that's how she was really caught from that. But I think again with Beverley was even at her trial, because don't forget, as we said before, she's had the Munchausen syndrome, then she's had Munchausen by proxy, so it's escalated to that. Her crimes were escalating very fast rate, everything. So she would have continued to kill a lot more. So then we took her to trial. So the trial lasted about 2 months with all the evidence. Now she's now come into this trial only 19 days. It's very rarely heard of. It's a murder. Someone charged with murder doesn't appear at their own trial, but she couldn't appear at her own trial only for these 19 days because she was ill. Of course she was, because that's what she does. Look at me, you've got all the attention you want, but that's not the attention she wants. You see, Munchausen syndrome is not about that sort of attention. She wants the medical attention. So now she's lost 6 stone in weight, and now she's anorexic. I'm ill. Look at me. But when she did turn up in this court for the 19 days, and I should have said it before, she actually pleaded not guilty to any of this, so they really had to work hard to prove this case. But she sat in that courtroom, she looked over to the parents of these children and smiled, as if she'd done nothing wrong. And, again, this attention, it's very, very eerie to see a real serial killer at work, even in a courtroom. And that's this blatantness of, I didn't do it, still trying to act this thing. And these poor parents, I don't know how they done it, but they did. So anyway, she's finally finished her 19 days, and of course now back, in hospital getting the treatment, because I need that treatment because I'm ill. And she's then The jury then have to listen to all this evidence, and I do think I should have to say that, you know, people were worried that this woman could have got off. You know, this wasn't an open and shut case, right? For a criminal case like this, really, for a murder trial of this size and the evidence that needed to be presented, but they presented enough evidence to make sure that there was no other person but her that could have done this. So they done it in the end, but it took a while and it took a lot of work. And so, you know, give the investigators that, and also to the legal team that did that, because no one would have wanted this woman to get a not guilty and be allowed out, because she would have then been able to go back to work. Very rare that someone would have hired you after that, but there would have always been someone. Okay, so, and the thing is with the Munchausen by proxy is it may not have been just younger children. She would have then maybe have gone to a nursing home where she had worked previously and gone for older, vulnerable adults, because they need easy victims. They need to, you know, have that. So that would have been the worry, and that was the worry. And that was about an 18-month worry as this trial was going on and the investigations in the court before this woman was actually convicted of murder. So she was convicted of 4 murders. She was convicted of, I have to look at my notes because I need to get this right. She was convicted of 4 murders, 3 attempted murders, 6 grievous bodily harm. Now, grievous bodily harm, that would have been under Section 17. That was probably for breaking the ribs and stuff. Section 18, where she had wounded with the intent because she broke the ribs and damaged other, you know, bones and stuff. And under the Offences Against a Person Act 1861, that would have covered that, which is a serious crime in itself, let alone the others. So as I say, if you need to know any more information on that, there's a lot on this case, and it's a very interesting case, but it goes into a lot of detail. Okay, so that's what the jury found her guilty of, and that's what she was charged with, and she got 13 life sentences for that. So we think that's really good. That's her sorted. So then they have to think where they're going to put her. And where do you think they put her? They put her in Grantham Secure Hospital. Now, I know that Munchausen syndrome by proxy is a psychological problem. It's a mental health issue. I know that. But I don't understand how you know this person craves it, this attention. So she would have now probably reverted back to just Munchausen syndrome, because it's going to be difficult for her to get hold of someone to, you know, kill in there, to get the empathy and everything from people on oh, look at me. So it's now gone back to herself, and it had already started going back to herself in the trial when she had the anorexia and lost 6 stone, and I can't attend court because I'm ill. Now they put her in Grantham Secure Hospital, where she is getting every bit of attention she needs. To her, she's living the best life she can live. But to tell her the truth, for me, with this woman, it doesn't matter where you'd put her, as long as she never gets out. Because if this woman ever got out, you need to be worried. So, you know, do I think she should have gone to prison? Yes, I do. Absolutely. Do I? Because I do. Or some form of prison, more than Grantham. But I suppose when you look at the psychological thing which she's got, even them prisoners wouldn't have been safe in the end. So I suppose Grantham is the best thing for her. You know, all her victims were vulnerable. All her victims were children, young children. She manipulated the families. She's, you know, took the family in. She made them feel safe. She made them feel comfortable. She made them leave the hospital so she had time for these children to do what she was doing to them. So is she probably one of the worst serial killers that Britain's ever seen? Absolutely. Because her crime span was short before she was caught. But what she potential as a serial killer is massive. And that's the one thing that I want you to take away from this case. Yes, you know, she's in there and she only worked up in this hospital 59 days, and in 59 days she done that to that many children. So I think we're going to leave this case with your thoughts, I suppose. Do you think, I suppose, Rampton Hospital, Secure Hospital, is good, is the right move? Do you think she should have spent time in prison? Do you think maybe things could have been different? I mean, things are done differently now, actually, in hospitals, so they are from these cases. I think I'm going to leave that case there because I know it's a very upsetting case, and it rolls me up a little bit, really, this case, because of her, and it's also her attitude after. You know, I think she still has visitors. I think when she was about 52, which wasn't that long ago, she was already, you know, on her deathbed and everything, but of course she's going to survive. She always does, because that's what she does. So anyway, I would suggest with this case, you know, look into it yourself, have a little wander around, have a look at what she did to these children, how she did it, and make up your own minds about Beverley Allitt. So this has been this case, bit of a disturbing case, a very sad case. It's a sad case for the children who lost their lives. It's even a sadder case for the parents that are left behind. But I think, as you know, there's not much else I can say about this case. So anyway, as normal, please thumbs up, subscribe. You can follow us on Instagram and on Facebook. Just look out for Murder Analysed. Share it out. Leave us some comments about what you think. You know, and I think the last thing I want to say is, I think, because people say, oh, you know, you get emotional in these cases. I've been doing this for years, these cases, you know, working in the law and then moving over to psychology and criminology, teaching the law and all these things. And so I have read and seen a lot of cases, but these cases still affect me the same way. So this sort of case where I think, you know, no, I don't think it could have been stopped. Do I think that maybe she could have got some help when she was younger? Maybe, don't know. So they do affect me. So I'd like to know your opinions on even on that. But so I hope you found this case interesting, and I'll see you on the next time. So thanks for watching. Bye bye.